Hey everyone, welcome back to Now for Wrath Gaming. Today, Andrew and I thought it would be fun to sit down and talk about how we prepare for and kind of carry ourselves at a tournament, as we have a really fun one coming up in just a week's time as of the recording. Andrew, you want to talk a little bit about that tournament, and then we can roll right into our first topic?
Yeah, so you might have seen us prep for it in a past bat rep, but it's an escalation tournament that at least for us, is unusual in rules, where you have to keep everything from your 400-point list and your 650-point list, and everything from your 650-point list and your 800 list. So can't take anything out as you go up. So
yeah,
it's a fun
it's
challenge.
A super cool.
Yeah.
I love a good challenge in list building. I don't love tournaments where they really mess with stuff, so I really like that this is like, hey, it's still the same game. There's just a little bit of extra challenge. I'm really excited about it. It's going to be really fun. Andrew and I, I think we're semi-competitive players. We certainly don't hit every tournament because real life is hard, and I wish we could hit every single tournament in our area because there actually are a lot, which is great. Yeah. But when we go, we take it pretty seriously and we think a lot about it. So we wanted to share with you kind of all the things that we do in preparation for a tournament. And, if you have never gone to a tournament before, maybe you have and felt underprepared, perhaps this can help a little bit, and we can, shed a little light on how we prepare. And, and feel free to ask any questions. We'll respond to every comment as quick as we can. So thank you all again for being here. Andrew, take us away. What's the first thing to think about heading to a tournament?
Well before the tournament, you want to think about your list, of course. It's no fun to show up to a tournament and be uninspired by your list because you didn't really give it any practice runs, didn't think about it enough. So build a list, of course. And
what do you think about when you're building a list for tournaments? Because they don't always release the scenarios. Sometimes they do. But I take into account what the format's going to be. We know that a lot of places do some form of veto. Sometimes they just say, here's the scenario. What do you tend to think about? What's like your priority for, here's the list I'm going to take to a tournament? Because taking a list to a tournament's a lot different than you're doing a bat rep. You want to think about, how am I going to perform over a series of games or a series of days?
Yeah, so I'm definitely guilty of not that it's guilty, but not being competitive.
No, you're guilty.
Yeah, I'm guilty.
Yeah.
My list building isn't usually as competitive as I would like it to be by the time I get to a tournament, but I'm starting to veer that way a little bit more after some disappointing, our group of friends kind of makes fun of me for Andrew lists that are just, I want to have fun and do something that's interesting to me. I don't want to play a list that builds itself or something that's not exciting to me.
Right.
I like to have tricks. I like to have magic or monsters if I can.
I think we also both love kind of bucking the meta.
Yeah.
Like, you won't often see us like, okay, we're going to play Assault on Lothlorien because we know it's good. I think you and I both love like, okay, that's good. Well, I'm going to find something else that's good.
Yeah.
Not that we won't play some kind of meta list when we're really feeling it, but in general, I think you and I both have kind of a counter streak in us where we're like, okay, I don't want to win with that.
Or if someone says this model is bad, I'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to put it in my list and try to prove you wrong.
In the 2-day tournament, get off the white. How'd that work out?
Great. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. So, I tend to, if you don't know what scenarios are coming up, there's really like 3 or 4 things that I kind of think through my list. And number one is, how am I going to close the distance?
Yeah.
And maybe that's I outshoot my opponent, because that's a form of closing the distance by saying, you figure out how to close this distance. That's typically my favorite, and I love outshooting by either having blinding light, like I love playing elves, and I love having Círdan, and having elf bows, and just saying, like, you now cross the board. Or there's kind of other ways you can close that distance. You play a lot of evil, so how do you think about, like, if there's going to be the scenarios with the 24-inch deployment gap, what do you do? Pray,
flail my arms, and hope it works
just give up. I just concede.
Yeah, I mean, I think in evil armies, I really try to make sure March or some kind of extra movements in my list because that's the only way. Yeah.
Well, that tournament we played in Nashville, you had the orc drum. And a lot of orcs.
And I had, oh, no, never mind. I did not have the blinding light, wraith.
No, you did. But you have played that before.
Yeah.
So that's one way. Drums, march, obviously. But this is like something you have to address. I think you either need to outshoot, highly outmaneuver, because if you have like a smaller elite army, you can also kind of hug terrain or if you're cavalry, you can kind of be cagey with shooting, or you have the shooting yourself, and you say, I am the puzzle, you solve it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the first thing I think about in lists.
Yep.
And magic can also help with that. Like, I'm going to play Angmar this tournament, which I just was talking about how we like to be unmeta, but I just want to be evil for once. I never play evil. I've never taken evil to a tournament, I don't think. ever.
Yeah.
So this is my first time. But they essentially have ways of closing the gap with Deadmarsh Spectres, with Compels, and where you can kind of like move them closer to close that gap. So that's kind of how I think about it with them.
Yep. But, and I guess another form of, or at least not caring as much about closing the gap, is if you're D8 dwarves or something, you're not too worried about those. So
You're kind of modus operandi there is like, I'm not going to close the gap fast, but you're not going to do anything to me either. Yeah. That's okay.
And you mentioned magic. That's another thing I think about a lot, is how to deal with if I'm facing a magic heavy list.
That's my second thing.
Yeah.
What are you going to do against magic?
Yeah. You gotta, in a perfect world, your big heroes have Fortify Spirit or something, or you have a spell to,
like Gandalf the White.
Like Gandalf the White.
He can give out Fortify
best
Spirit
in the game.
Nice. Yeah. This is why I like Glorfindel better in Rivendell. That's another conversation.
That's why I'm taking him instead of...
That's right. I
love Gil-galad, but oh man, it can be disappointing.
Yeah, that's right. But I think Andrew brings up a good point. Either you want to be the one controlling the magic, or you want to be prepared for it, because it can really change a game. And sometimes the way to prepare is just like, well, I've got like 5 heroes.
Right.
So shut one down and whatever.
Yeah, that's fine. So the thing you don't want, I think, is a big, expensive hero that has no way to deal with magic. Right. You can have 5 cheap heroes that, they're not going to shut them all down. It's not the end of the world. But if your biggest... if something you invested tons of points in has no way to deal with magic, then that's disappointing.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the second thing. I'm sure there's a whole episode talking about how you think about magic and how you kit for it or against it. I think the third thing I think about is, okay, what if we're in a contest of champions-like situation? And if there's veto, then I'm a little less concerned, because if it's within that pool, there's other options, as you can see from our 4th battle report. But I do often think about, how am I going to deal with big bad heroes? If they have a Gil-galad and Elendil across the table from me, what am I going to do against that?
Right.
Do I have a crap ton of models and I'm just going to swamp it? I think that's a pretty valid, I'm just going to feed you 2 models a turn. You're getting your free heroic combat. Or do you have magic yourself? What else?
Yeah, dealing with big bad heroes is, I take magic a lot, so that's usually my way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
But I guess it ties into what is your advantage in general? Your list has to have something going for it. It can't be okay at everything.
Right. What's your engine?
Yeah. Which can be tons of bodies, which that's how you deal with the big hero. It can be tons of magic. That's how you deal with the hero.
You got your own big hero who's ready to fight, ready to scrap. Yeah, so those, I think, there's obviously a lot of other things, but those tend to be my top 3 in decision making. And then maybe the final one, I say that we've really kind of abstracted, but I also think about, what about ones where you have to spread out?
Yeah.
Because I tend to play armies that work together in a block. I think about the game that way. Yeah. And so sometimes I'll be like, oh my God, there's objectives all over. How am I going to deal with that? Whether it's models with high courage, high mobility, so that you can kind of go for that last second grab on objectives. That's another one I think about. I don't know. How about you? What do you think about for those scenarios?
Yeah, it's another issue of being able to react, so high mobility is nice in those cases where you can, clump up and then spread out.
Yeah.
I guess that also brings up, what are you going to do when you break? Because if you're spread out, that's really bad news. Or if you don't have, if you have orc courage and you don't have a shaman, you got to think about the game really goes south. So
it's going to be over quick.
Yeah.
And for better or worse.
Yeah.
Maybe you want it.
Maybe that's good. Yeah.
Like in our Angmar game, I was like, I'm going to break and it's going to end. And then the game just kept going and I was screwed.
Yeah.
So those are, I'm sure that we could deep dive on each one of those topics and entire other episodes of this. But just as I'm building a list, those are kinds of the things I'm thinking about, because you don't know what you're going to be up against. You don't know. There's really 3 factors that you have to think about coming into a game: your opponent, the scenario, and the terrain.
Yeah.
And some of those are harder to prep for than others.
Yep.
But you use every bit of information, I think, to kind of help make your decision.
Yeah, there were so many terrains and so many factions and so many ways to build each faction. There are too many combinations to prepare for them all. So you do as much as you can up ahead of time and try to think about the zoomed out, okay, what if I face this heavy list or this heavy list? You're not going to be able to think about, what if I face so-and-so led by so-and-so? In this scenario, you just can't prepare for it all. So you just got to try to cover as much as you can, or be able to lean into one thing really hard and still win.
And sometimes that's fun too. You're like, you know what? I'm going all in and I'm hoping for the right situation, the right matchups, and see if that pulls the day for me. Which it can. Especially in a 3-round tournament, there's so much luck.
Lucky. Yep.
Yeah, you just never know.
It's a dice game before you even have to roll dice in the game.
That's one of my favorite things. I love that about tournaments. I love thinking what am I going to do against this?
Yeah.
I'm going to do nothing and hope I don't face it or whatever, Okay. talking more about just your army that you brought, I was thinking a lot about, we know that there are a lot of hard to find models. So there are proxies. We 3D print. I buy when I can and when it makes sense to, which is pretty frequently, but there's times where there's just models that are completely unavailable, or they're like on the secondary market for way too much money, or a recaster, in which case I will 3D print us a proxy. Most tournaments have no problem with proxies, but if you're taking proxies, you should check with the tournament organizer, which I've done for this one. And I think it's really important that your proxies be super clear.
Yeah.
I think Andrew and I hold ourselves to a pretty, what you see is what you get standard, so that you're not forcing your opponent to remember things about your army. Yeah. That feels icky to me.
Yeah, I think, most tournament, handbooks, that's
packets.
Not right. Packets will say, the gear needs to match at least to some extent. Or I think we've seen before where, if you've got proxies for your warriors and the war gear doesn't necessarily match, it's okay as long as you say they're all the exact same thing, and you don't have to remember, okay, this guy with the leaf on his base doesn't actually have a shield. It can't be that.
That's the stuff that gets too
nothing.
tough. Yeah. Like we'll often do with orcs, hey, all the orcs have axes or picks. There's no reason to take swords with orcs, I think.
Yeah, but that might be tough to, that's probably something you want to check with in the tournament. Even though you are saying they're all the same thing, I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
It's probably okay, but...
And again, we try to hold ourselves to what you see is what you get for most of our models. So it just reduces the complexity. And I think you and I both have a similar philosophy. We want to win in a game, not on a gotcha. Yeah, no. We don't want you to be like, oh, I forgot that guy had a... Yeah. We're not trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. I think we're trying to win it super clean.
You want to win because you did better, not because you're, your opponent... I guess that could go into the whole being courteous and being a fun person to play against, and what do you let go? What do you help out with?
Let's table that for a second, but I think we do wrap up the episode talking a little bit about that. I wanted to touch on our tournament kit. I think it's really important to think about what you bring with you, because I, for one, get really frustrated when my opponent's okay, and they're digging through a bag, or they don't have stuff, and you're just okay. Let's get going. We've got limited time here. So, we have this really nice tournament kit. It's a toolbox with little individual containers, and it has basically everything we need. You want to list off some of those things we bring?
Yeah. So
I'll keep track.
We got measuring tools, both a 6-inch tool and a measuring tape.
Right.
I think we both, and most people probably prefer just having a 6-inch measuring tool for most of their movement. It's not, you're not trying to make measuring tape work. Objective markers. Very important. Sometimes some tournaments they'll give them out, sometimes they don't, and you're you don't want to be the one who maybe you and your opponent both don't have them, and you're scrambling, and
you're trying to figure out what you're
10
doing.
minutes behind, and you have to figure it out.
We actually have multiple sets. Some of them are painted on two sides for the capture and control. Some of them are cool 3D prints. It kind of just depends what you're doing with those.
So you need 6 of those, or
6. I don't think any scenarios have more than 6.
No, let's see. Well, dice. You should probably bring dice. It's kind of important. Yeah.
And I think it's important to have multiple colors of dice, because often you're saying, okay, this guy's fainting, and this is my hero. So might matter. So it's important, I think, to have different colors dice, and so you're not kind of.
And it saves time to be able to throw a fistful and just have them all identified ahead of time, instead of having to say, here's my whatever, here's my whatever, here's my whatever.
Right. Here's this. Here's a new kind of addition to our kit. Loom bands. They're cheapy little loom bands. They come in different colors. Those things are a lifesaver.
Yeah.
They've completely changed our game.
And maybe you need tweezers too.
Yeah, but maybe some tweezers to get. Yeah, when you've got ham hands like me, and you're trying to get one off and it's catching on spears, it's really frustrating. So I've literally kept some tweezers to grab those off. That's the nerdiest thing on our kit.
Yeah, it's definitely. We love them for showing a model's prone, because you don't always have room to lay a model down, or this, if you've got rangers, which I'm sure you do, handy to mark things. But
Yep. Those rangers with 1 might, 1 fate, and you've got 30 of them, that's impossible to have your opponent keep track of.
Yeah.
So those are really nice. The other thing we've added recently are base size templates. And those are really nice. You can plug it in and see, can a 25 millimeter base fit through there?
Yeah.
Can a 40 millimeter base fit through there?
Yep.
It's super nice, super handy without having to get in and move models. If you're interested in one of those, I have the STL file. Just hit me up and I can share you the STL file. Hey, puppy. Dog trying to get in the episode. Anything else in the kit that you can think of that we have? Super glue. You want to bring super glue.
Yeah.
I have several times had a spear break and forgotten glue, which really sucked.
Pencil, something to write with.
Yes, pencils.
Mark, for writing on scorecards at the end and for marking, you want to take notes.
Right.
If you're having to track how many kills you got in a scenario or track the might and will and such of your opponent.
Hey, speaking of lists and taking notes, Tabletop Admiral, shameless plug, Andrew makes Tabletop Admiral for MESBG, Star Wars Legion, Star Wars Shatterpoint. It's a great list building tool, easily my favorite. Not because you're my friend, because it's really, really good. But Andrew built it with tournaments in mind. So when you go to print it out, it actually has little checkboxes for all of your expendable resources. And there's a table for you to write in your opponents. This is really important because I've played a lot of games where people will just say it and then there will be a like, hey, I have one might left, right? And you're like, nope, you spent it. And I'll have my notes like, okay, he did a move, a strike, and a move. And so it's gone. It's really important, I think, trust but verify, right?
Yeah. So just I'd start the game by writing, if you can, write the might, will, fate, and wounds of every hero or multi-wound model they have, and just keep track of it from the start. And it's okay to ask your opponent, if you don't know how much might something has, just ask them. They should be perfectly willing to answer questions.
It's or public
check
information.
Tabletop Admiral if you need to.
That's right. There you go.
That's what I often find easier than asking. Sometimes I'll pull up their faction and just check the heroes and just write
I will too, just to have their rules handy.
Yep.
So I have my printout because I like having a hard copy, and then I always have my opponent's faction. I don't like build their whole list. I just have their faction on my phone so I can like quick reference stats and things. I think that's, as you're making your decisions, you might not always be familiar with everything out there. On the topic of printouts, I always bring one extra like clean copy that I don't mark up, and I always give that to my opponent at the start of the game because I just you want to make sure they're seeing your list. Again, we're not trying to win on any gotchas. Not that there aren't some fun psychological games to happen, but being obtuse about what's in your army, what it's capable of, that's all like public information and that should be shared. Any other thoughts on Tabletop Admiral?
No, just check it out. It's useful.
It's awesome. It really is awesome. If you have not played with it yet, please play with it. Your opponents will love you because it formats so nicely. Your tournament organizers will love you because it reads so nicely. And I will stop with the shameless plug. So thank you for the effort. It's awesome. A couple other things I just want to talk about going into a tournament. I'm an old man. I get tired. It's important to wear like comfy clothes and comfortable shoes. I know that's lame, but often, man, the tables are at that height where, like, by the end, I'm like, oh, my back hurts.
As a 6'3" person, that's not fun. The tables are short.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not young and spry anymore. When I got to lean over the table, I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
Yep.
Especially like there's some turns where they're really low.
Oh yeah, I hate it.
So I try to sit as often as I can. Because this is an I go, you go. It's kind of nice. Like, okay, move. I'm gonna sit and chill. Comfortable shoes.
Yep.
Hugely important. Stay hydrated.
Maybe deodorant if you feel like it.
Dude, please, God, please wear deodorant, man. Please do that.
Not that bad in the MESBG world, from what I've...
Not too bad. Not too bad. Not always perfect.
Yeah,
not always perfect. But generally, probably okay.
Consider it. No, that's a psychological warfare on your opponent.
Maybe it is, is it psychological or like a chemical warfare?
It's chemical,
Wow, that sucks. Yeah. It stinks, huh? I'm going to wear, like a tank top.
You have to pass a smells check just to get close enough to the table.
Pass your smells check, dude. But it is important, I think, to stay hydrated. Maybe have a little snack on hand. That's like such dad advice.
Yeah.
Like, don't go to a tournament without your comfortable shoes. Wear your jacket. It's cold outside.
Make sure your shoes are tied.
That's right. So we can move on past that.
Okay.
In the game itself, we've already touched on some of this. Things to think about, as you're getting the game going. What are maybe some of the checklists you go through with your opponent before even dice are starting or deployment starting?
Yeah, like we talked about, make sure you're familiar with everything they have in their list.
Yep.
And strategically think about what their thing is if you can. If you can, if you're new to the game, it might be hard to quickly, garner just from, a couple keywords what their thing is, but try to think about what you have over them advantage-wise and what they have over you and what you need to be worrying about.
Yep. I start formulating a plan right as soon as I see their army.
Yep.
I think there's a couple of important discussion topics to have with your opponent. This can take 30, 45 seconds. Here's a big one. Do dice count when they roll out of the tray or not? Do yourself a favor and get that figured out before any dice roll, because there's nothing worse than having that first die bounce out and it's a 6 that you were looking for and you kind of stare at each other and then agree to be consistent.
Yep. Because you don't want to make that decision based on what the first die roll is.
Right.
Because you might do it. You might not do it because you're trying to get one over, but you're like, maybe you'll get nudged to make dice out of the box count.
That's right.
Because you rolled a 6, and that's not fair.
You're setting yourself up to be trustworthy by having this conversation. And don't tempt me, Frodo. You don't want to be tempted with it. Just have the conversation ahead of time. We play, if it's out of the tray, it doesn't count. I think that's a cool, kind of fun, rule to live by. It also means we're always rolling in the tray, so dice are always visible to each other. Sometimes there's terrain like, hey, I got a 6. I'm like, can I see that? Not that I don't trust people, but this is just a good, I think it's a good rule of thumb. Play in the tray. If it bounces out, we're counting it or not. Just call it ahead of time. I think that's really worth, getting out of the way. I like to think, hey, are we going to do declarative movement stuff here? Because sometimes it can come down to millimeters, but again, we're talking long days. You're hunched over a model. You're hunched over the table, rather. It's nice to say, hey, I'm outside of 6 inches of this guy. And it sucks to then get to their turn and be like, oh, sorry, you're in. It's 5.9. When I could have I could have been here. So I play very declaratively. This is just the messiness of miniatures. They get bumped. Tables get bumped. Things are just ever so slightly imprecise. Now, declarative doesn't mean, you get to make things up, but it's more like, hey, I have the movement here to be at 6.1 inches. I'm putting him here. This looks like 6.1 inches to me. My intention is to be there. And then on their turn, it's like, hey, you're actually right at 6. Okay, let me nudge him back a hair. I think it's really important to be declarative. And if you don't declare it, then it's fair game. If I've intended to do that, but I kept my mouth shut and he says, oh, you're in charge range. Well, I didn't declare it, so that's fair game. I think that makes for a much cleaner game.
I do. I like to declare things. I don't necessarily set up beforehand that we are going to play declarative. Maybe I'm just not enough of a, I don't know. I probably should, but that is how I choose to play, and I give the person that same respect until they don't give it to me. I play friendly. I guess in general, unless I'm playing with you.
In which case you're horrible. And poison my coffee.
But it's kind of trying to decide what kind of game you want to play, which goes back to, we don't want to win on the gotcha. So if you forgot to move a model that there's no reason you wouldn't have moved it, you have to decide how you want to play. I'll say you would have moved it,
Right. I find that on, this is a weird thought, but higher level play, when you're playing people who are really good, they're very cool about that. And it's kind of the mid tables where people start to get really prickly about it. And, it's just looking for any advantage. But I think higher tier players tend to be like, of course you would have done that. I play that way.
And we would encourage anybody new to play that way. And don't get soured by someone not playing that way and stop doing it yourself. Just keep doing it. Be fun to play against. Most people are going to be fun to play against.
At the end of the day, these are like little toy soldiers. And long ago, I decided my own self-worth and self-esteem is not tied up in my performance with little toy soldiers. So it is much easier to just, whatever. Not saying you shouldn't be competitive. We love being competitive, but we also want to sleep at night. And I don't want to feel like I'm, getting one over on anyone. At the same time, I don't want to play people who are really unpleasant to play. We're playing toy soldiers for leisure. So just chill. Because, man, nothing sucks worse than having a game that you walk away from that was a huge waste of my time. And I'm so frustrated.
I just spent 2.5 hours against someone who's miserable. That's great.
And it does happen, but not often. Not a lot. Thankfully, it's quite a rarity. One more thing I want to talk about declaring with my opponent, and then I have another tip that I kind of want to go back to that's slightly about preparation. And that's talking about terrain. Too often I've seen games start and I'm like, oh, that's difficult. You're like, no, what? That's not difficult. And it's kind of a rubble base, but not super rubbly. I think it's just important to just go through the table and say, what are we counting this as? How are we doing this?
And sometimes you might need to pull a TO over to, because both of you, when you're deciding that, it may be in my interest to say this is woodland or this is shallow or something.
I have a ton of cavalry. Is this difficult or is it open?
I had that with shallow. There was a stream or a river or something, and I wanted it to be shallow. He wanted it to be deep. So we just called the TO over and, decided.
And I think that's okay. And if ever, for me, if I call a TO over, I'm rarely trying to be mean or anything. I'm just like, let's just get an impartial person to
we need someone impartial because we both have our own interests in mind.
Especially if we both have differing opinions because it benefits us. Just what was the TO's intention? I will tell you, to you TOs out there, I've played in a couple of tournaments where there's just a little card that says like what all the terrain is.
Nice.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
And I have yet to provide terrain for a tournament. Have I ever done that? I don't think I have. But I plan to have like just a little note card that says like, hey, these wood bases are woods. These shrubs are a 5-up in the way rather than a 4-up. Like all that stuff. Just a quick little rules check, just so everyone's kind of approaching it from the same perspective.
Speaking of disagreements or, things you need to check on, I don't think we mentioned you should bring your rule book.
Absolutely.
And ideally have quick access to the FAQs on your phone or something because, people are wrong a lot. I've been wrong before. I've had opponents who are wrong and thought they were completely sure.
Yep.
So sometimes you just got to look it up to settle an argument. And maybe you'll find out. Maybe you'll learn something new because you thought something the whole time and you were wrong about.
That's right. Yeah. We've learned rules that way. And that's cool. Like, I'm happy to do that. I have no problem being wrong. It happens all the time. And the rule book is dense and this is not my whole life. So there's times where I'm like, oh, we've been playing that wrong this whole time. Awesome.
Yep.
That's a good point, though. Have your rule book, but also be willing to call over the TO.
Yeah.
Again, not trying to be, you just don't want to have a rules argument mid-game. You just say, hey, let's just ask the TO how he wants to rule this.
Yep.
I have a little bit of an anecdote and an advice for quick playing there. But before we move on, I did want to say, prior to the game, I mentioned it can be frustrating when someone's like digging through their stuff and they have foam trays. Here's the best investment we've ever made. This works for both traveling and for between tables. We bought brownie trays for our models and glue magnets to the bottom of each. And the brownie tray has a plastic lid over the top of it.
Important. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yep.
And as you're playing, you're just putting guys back, going to the next table. Cool. Let me just pop those guys over and they're like ready to play. Because my gosh, there's nothing worse like, oh, you're playing Goblin Town? And they're individually packed in foam trays.
And they have it on the floor and they're picking them up.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, can we please get going? Which maybe is a general advice. These are timed games.
Yep.
And don't run the clock. Don't run the clock, either intentionally or even before the game starts. Just try to play reasonably fast. Don't rush, but, that's just general advice.
Yep.
I feel like I said I had something else, but yes, I do remember. Talking about that, we did mention rolling a cluster of colored dice to help speed things up. I think you can do the same in shooting. It's actually mentioned in the rule book where you can say, hey, these 5 guys are shooting. I'm going to roll 5 dice. We think it's really important to declare, hey, these 5 guys are shooting at him, but if they kill him, here's my secondary, here's my tertiary target. We know that, theoretically, you should do that shooting one at a time, but that's going to bog the game down, especially with heavy shooting. So, a lot of times it's easier to just roll a fistful of dice, but kind of predetermine what your order is. That's just kind of a quick aside I was thinking about that is good to know ahead of time. What else? What else do we have? I know we're kind of coming up on time here.
We talked about the trays and, packing up your models. I don't know if you don't travel with miniatures much, make sure they're snug and there are things against them and they're not going to slide around. Because, there are some little brittle pieces on a lot of those. And if your models are, even if they're magnetized, they can still shift some unless you have super strong magnets, which you don't want. So I think we've been pretty good about it. I don't know if we've had anything break.
One time I dropped the whole tray.
Oh yeah, there's that.
I dropped the whole tray of elves and Numenor, and it, like in slow motion, I was like, Ave Maria, and they tipped upside down and landed spear first on the ground, and it took me like hours to fix that. But besides that, we've had no major issues.
Yeah. So don't stick them loose in the trunk with nothing near them where they can, you slam the brakes and just put some clothes around them or do something.
That's a real nightmare.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else I want to cover. This has been a lot of fun. We enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hey, again, we're open to feedback, thoughts, comments. I think we're thinking about doing a similar series for this, talking about the different factions, particularly the factions we own and play. Kind of high level, talking about what their thing is, and I think we'll kind of apply those, those pointers we talked about at the beginning. How do you close the gap? How do you deal with big heroes? How do you deal with magic? I think it's fun to just kind of go through factions, and who doesn't love a little more MESBG talk?
Yep.
Right?
I think it'll be good. So 3 bet reps, 1 not bet rep, I think is going to be the schedule.
Yeah, that's kind of our plan. So we're so appreciative of you all joining us. Honestly, it's meant the world to us. Thank you so much for subscribing and commenting and liking our videos. And I guess we'll see you in the next battle report.
Hold.
Harold.
Howard.